Okay, well, good afternoon. And I want to begin by saying, obviously, we're gathering because we are in session, and this session is extremely important for the city of Albuquerque and for the state of New Mexico. We know there's lots of things going on with respect to budget and so forth, but obviously, crime has to be our top priority. And for us, this is something we've been building towards since our Metro Crime Initiative started back in the middle of the summer. And it's as a refresher, we got together with every law enforcement agency in central New Mexico, and we hashed through what exactly is happening with the criminal justice system and why is the criminal justice system broken. And what we came up with is actually 40 different things we have to do. There is no one answer, but we know this, even just in the few weeks since the new year, we've had 3 homicides in Albuquerque. We know that this is on the heels of the most violent year in our city's history. And we know that these problems have been going on for far too long. They've been building every year up until this year. And we've even seen escalation in violent crime really in Albuquerque for the last decade. And as we know from other reports that are now coming out, crime is up in 20 counties around the state as well. So we do believe this is a statewide issue. But first and foremost, it is a metro issue. But we know that everyone's children typically go to school in Albuquerque, people go to the mall in Albuquerque, people use the airport in Albuquerque, people use our hospitals in Albuquerque. So unfortunately, for better or worse, Albuquerque's problems are also the state's problems. And we are asking for help because we have to get tough on crime, but we cannot do that alone. We need the state legislators' help. And I appreciate the governor stepping up in some areas of this, but there's a bigger picture that we want to paint today that we agreed last summer we have to advocate for. And it's about how we stop that revolving door. So it is about things like pretrial detention, but we also need help from the courts on things like the CMO. We also need funding for the courts. We can't have a system that can't actually fund the tracking of criminals with ankle bracelets on a 24/7 basis. So this is why our Metro Crime Initiative is so important, because there's a number of components to it, including funding our violence intervention program statewide, because we know that when it comes to violent criminals, the city boundary is not really meaningful. They're here because this is the largest city in a vastly rural area. And so that's what we've got to focus on more, a lot less on whose jurisdiction is what, which, and where the boundaries are for various law enforcement agencies or even state legislative seats. And so for us, we also know that our approach has to deal with the nexus between a use of a firearm, a weapon, and that nexus between justice in the criminal justice system, which is not happening right now. And basically what that means is that if you use a violent weapon or a weapon in a violent crime, we want to treat that situation differently, meaning more seriously, so that there's less likelihood of you being out creating another crime. And so we'll talk about what this means with respect to the revolving door, but we know that we need help now and we need action now. And we absolutely have to make a statement that our legislature and our community is with us on this. The last thing I would just share is that I have met, as many of us have in the metro area, with the parents of people who've lost loved ones because of violent crime. And they're fed up with it. They're fed up with the studies, the finger pointing, and the talk. They just want action. And that's what we have to have in this session. And that's what we're committed to with our respective efforts at APD and at the city of Albuquerque. So with that, I'll hand it back over, I think, to Babak to walk us through who's next.
Thank you, Mayor. Next, we'll have Chief Harold Medina speak to us about some of the public safety legislation that's expected to come up this session that the city supported.
Good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank you for being here this afternoon and hearing some of the concerns that we have and some of the things that we're trying to accomplish. You know, I've said it many times, it's time that we draw that line in the sand. It's not just a line in the sand that the Albuquerque Police Department wants to draw, it's something that the community is demanding. We need to lower violent crime. We're supporting bills in the legislature to make sure that violent offenders, gun offenders, are held accountable. We are asking for the support of all our partners to strengthen APD in each law enforcement department that needs help right now. We'll be advocating for pretrial rebuttal presumptive to detention, and for those that are charged with a violent crime to ensure that they are not released into the community if it can't be shown that they do not pose a threat to the community. Penalty enhancement for criminals who are using a firearm. If you brandish or you're in possession of a firearm while you're committing crime, I've said it over and over again, you are apprehension attempt away from becoming a violent offender towards the citizen who discovers you committing these crimes or an officer who tries to apprehend you. A task force to examine officer retention and recruitment. This is about supporting efforts for APD and law enforcement agencies statewide. When our surrounding jurisdictions are strengthened, it only helps the city of Albuquerque. Many times there are agencies such as state police who could assist us even more with some of our biggest challenges. We know that during this period of COVID, traffic issues have risen throughout the city of Albuquerque. There's a lot of state roads, freeways, where other agencies can assist us. And we're here to advocate for all parts of the criminal system, including other agencies, to get support and to be able to expand the direction they're going and the resources that they have availability to. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Now, I'd like to invite Senior Policy Advisor for APD, Damon Martinez, to speak about some of the investments in public safety the city is pursuing.
Good afternoon. Albuquerque's public safety infrastructure technology has been decades behind for too long. With the leadership of the mayor, he has turned it around in the past 4 years with $80 million of technology investment. We are going back to the legislature for 3 more things, specifically to modernize the APD main building and APD Academy. Also, mobile speed enforcement technology and citywide expansion of street lighting.
Damon. Next, I'd like to welcome up CAO Sarita Nair to speak about a second section of the MCI agenda at session.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here today. You know, a lot of attention has been in the paper recently about some of the legislation that deals with policy change and so forth to address violent crime. Less attention has come to the other key parts of this agenda, and they all work together. We all know that there's not one silver bullet that's going to fix the entire criminal justice system. So I'm going to talk about a few of those other programs that have gotten less attention but are equally important parts of the MCI agenda. First is expanding the Violence Intervention Program, or VIP. The City of Albuquerque launched this program in 2020, and this involves directly going to people who are most likely to commit violent crime, either because of their association with a group or gang, or because they've recently been involved in a series of events like being attacked by a rival gang that makes them likely to commit a crime themselves. And by getting these folks support, counseling, the resources they need, and also letting them know that enforcement is aware that they are at high risk for committing violent crime, less than 5% of our VIP participants have reoffended. That's an amazing statistic. And we want to see that program not only fully funded here in Albuquerque, but also expanded statewide. So there's 2 different pieces of legislation for that. We also support the examination of gun violence as a public health issue, which I know that just kind of sounds like gun violence is somehow related to COVID, but it's not. It's about public health is all about moving upstream and understanding the contributing factors that make someone engage in a behavior. And for gun violence, that means understanding the underlying issues like trauma, poverty, addiction that are leading to the spiking gun crimes that we're seeing. We have to invest money in researching this at the state level. And this is also the time for bold investments in our behavioral health system, which, as we all know, was systematically dismantled in 2013. These are going to have really lasting impacts in our community, and they include the Gibson Health Complex, which would have a sobering center and a medical respite center in addition to emergency shelter beds. It includes $25 million to expand affordable housing, $15 million to rehab supportive housing, where you pair housing with services, creating that 24/7 sobering center to accompany the care campus, which is a great program, but not enough for our community. And we're also supporting our partners' asks to increase the staffing in the court system, especially specialty courts, for increasing outpatient treatment for individuals returning from incarceration, for adequately funding the GPS and all other pretrial monitoring systems.
Thanks so much. So we're going to pause the camera and move to Q&A here. So if you have sent questions to Ava or raised your hand, she'll get you in the queue for questions.
Ava, go ahead.
All right. I see we've got Nancy Laughlin, KOAT, on for the first question. Nancy, are you on mute there?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
There is a man by the name of Andrew Orozco. He is on the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Department's Facebook page, and APD helped with his arrest. And according to the Sheriff's Department, he is a convicted felon, and they arrested him and they found fentanyl, cocaine, crack, pot, $7,000 in cash, guns, and a bulletproof vest. And he was arrested on the 19th. Again, APD was involved in that arrest, APD Narcotics, along with the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Department. Anyway, court records showed that he was released the next day. Your thoughts on that? He's out.
Would you like to address this question?
Nancy, I think you just supported exactly what we're saying in the fact that there are some people that need to remain in jail. You just described a drug dealer. You described somebody who we've seen an increase in homicides over the past year related to drug transactions. And this individual, number one, has a large sum of money. It sounds like the individual has distribution amounts of narcotics, and the individual is carrying a gun for a reason. And too many times we've seen individuals killed over $20, $40 debts that are conducted or owed because of a drug transaction. That is exactly why we need to change the direction that our state is going and draw that line in the sand. Individuals such as the one you just spoke about should be in jail and should remain in jail until trial because they are a danger to the community.
Chief, my next question is, for years, I have seen law enforcement and victims talk to lawmakers and ask for changes with the laws, and nothing, they don't pass.
You know, Nancy, I myself have gone to Santa Fe for years, but I think that we're at a troubling time that crime, especially violent crime, has got to a level that our citizens are fed up. And I think they've made their voice heard very well, that they demand change. I think that this has been addressed from every level. Just last week, I saw the governor of the state of New Mexico, the mayor of the city of Albuquerque, the attorney general, the DA, and Mayor Keller's concept of bringing all the key players together in MCI is what helps drive these partnerships and uniting in one voice and making sure that the state legislature hears it and understands that they're speaking as representatives of the people, and the people want change and the people want safety. And I hope that everybody in Santa Fe is listening clearly to what is being funneled to them through their representatives, that we need to get tough on crime and that we need to draw that line in the sand that's going to keep the citizens of this state safe.
Thank you, Chief. Ava, would you let us know who's next in the queue for questions? Right. So we've got Ryan Laughlin on. Ryan, please go ahead.
Thanks, Bobak. Two questions. The first is about the violence intervention program expansion. Is there a dollar amount that the administration would like to see allocated to that? And how many more people are we looking to hire? When I had a conversation with Jerry Pachicha, she said, I think they have 4 caseworkers now, and she said it'd be great to have 40 to do 10 in each quadrant of the city to really make violence intervention program make some meaningful results. Do you guys have a target goal for how you would like to see the violence intervention program expanded with dollars and or people?
Yeah, Sarita, would you speak to this?
Thanks for the question, Ryan. So totally agree with Jerry's analysis. We know the impact that we've been able to have with the existing set of caseworkers and law enforcement officers who are working on this program. But we really do believe that increasing it by about tenfold is probably what we need to really move the needle on violence in the city. So our request to the legislature this year is $2 million for the Albuquerque program. And in addition, we'll be adding money from our local budget in this budget cycle. And a new feature of the VIP program that's coming online, we actually have folks working on it now, is the Trauma Recovery Center. And that will be located in the Gibson Health Complex. But the idea there is really having that place to catch folks in that moment when they've experienced gun crime, when they might be likely to retaliate, and having a place where they can go to get those services. It's not an inpatient facility, but a central location where case managers and folks who can help them move through that trauma will be located. So our capital request for, we also have some capital requests related to that and with the state as part of our larger Gibson Health Hub request.
Thanks, Sarita. And I have one follow-up question that's in a similar vein. Is the ask from the legislature or then the funding, is there anything going to the Albuquerque community safety? This was an exciting idea, and I still think it's in its infancy, but having people respond to calls that are not best suited for police. I think when we talk about violent crime, we can't ignore, as Nancy just mentioned, the nexus between drugs and addiction with violent crime. Can you give us an update on where things are at with the Albuquerque community safety and if that's at all tied into the Metro Crime Initiative and the funding that we're seeking? Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Also another great question. So the Albuquerque Community Safety Department launched in September. They hired their first set of behavioral health responders. They are taking calls off the plates of police where we can get the right response at the right time. It's actually, knock on wood, been a really amazing rollout for the past few months. First, we started with our behavioral health responders, and now our community responders who are going out to calls like abandoned vehicles and needle pickup are starting to come online, and we're seeing the effects in a reduced burden on law enforcement, but also a really strong working relationship with the fire department and with better outcomes for the people that we're encountering because we're actually getting them to the services they need. The primary funding source for that is the general fund, and we plan to ask for money in this year's budget to pretty much double the size of that department. We think we can do it. We've got proof of concept. And fundamentally, we believe that this should be funded just like all the other core public safety departments. We have this as a full sort of cabinet level first responder department. The ask to the legislature relates to the capital for a facility that they intend to construct in the Catherine San Mateo region, which would be the headquarters for the expanded ACS department. Right now, they're on the first floor of City Hall. They have a great facility, but as we add responders and cars, we're going to need more room. So we do have a capital ask in for that facility.
And sorry, Sarita, one more. You said that they've taken some calls from police, limiting the burden on APD. Is there any way to quantify that in the early going so far?
There absolutely is. We can get you those stats afterwards. I don't want to give you bad numbers, but I think they're averaging about 13, 14 calls a day. And that's without being fully built out to a 24/7 model. And so when we look at the response, the create to clear time on those calls when police go out, it's about 2-3 hours for those calls to be cleared. So if you multiply that, you can really see how there's an immediate impact on the police officers and their ability to respond to the real crimes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan, and we'll make sure to get that data over to you afterwards. Next, we have Susan from the AP, I believe, with a question.
Yes, thank you for taking our questions this afternoon. We know that the Legislative Finance Committee had did a really in-depth, deep dive into our situation here in Bernalillo County. They had a lot of findings that they reported on Monday. So I was hoping maybe the chief or Ms. Nair could fill us in on the city's perspective about this. They talked a lot about the accountability gap as we see crime rates increasing and yet arrests and prosecutions and thus convictions not keeping pace with that. So, any response to those LFC findings?
Sure. Sarita, would you like to speak to it?
Thanks for the question, Susan. We got the report at the same time as everyone else, but a few things jumped out right away. First of all, we're just not going to engage in this piecemeal whack-a-mole approach to looking at the criminal justice system anymore. The rebuttable presumption related to pretrial detention is part of MCI, but it's not the whole answer. Nobody ever said it was the whole answer. It's one of 40 points. And talking about that or knocking it down in isolation really is just not the way we can afford to look at criminal justice issues in the metro anymore. But also, there do seem to be some fundamental confusion within the report. First of all, the collapse of the criminal justice system here in the metro didn't happen overnight. In 2010, the city dealt with budgetary issues by cutting police pay, which led to a steady decrease at APD in 8 years between 2010 and when we got here in 2018, netted a loss of 250 officers. In 2013, the behavioral health system was systematically dismantled, and the state cut off funding to 15 behavioral health providers, all of whom were ultimately absolved, but the damage was done. In 2015, overcrowding at the jail resulted in the case management order that put pressure on police and DAs to move cases more quickly, but there was no concomitant increase in staffing at the DAs, at the public defenders, or at the courts. In 2016, the voters of New Mexico approved the constitutional amendment on bail reform, and that created the set of criteria that we're talking about for when a person should be held pre-trial. Also from a great place, from a compassionate place, from a place of wanting economic justice in this state. But it was not accompanied by a bolstering of other safety measures like ankle monitoring, like other things to keep people safe when you don't have pretrial detention. And then in 2017, the city and county settled that 20-year-old jail overcrowding case. The city's piece of that was that police agreed not to arrest on nonviolent misdemeanors. That was great, but without the behavioral health system, there was really no alternative to those arrests. So when we look at this report, there are some just fundamental disconnects with that history. So when we see arrest numbers go down, we have to remember that in 2017, we fundamentally changed who the police were allowed to arrest. We also, this report talks a lot about getting caught. On page 5, it says research shows the certainty of being caught is a more powerful deterrent to crime than severity of punishment. Everyone who's facing pre-trial detention has already been caught once. The question is, how many times are we going to ask the men and women in our police department to catch them before we can stop them from committing additional crimes? And when we talk about this rebuttable presumption, what we're really talking about is that the threat of getting caught doesn't mean anything anymore. So when we look at the drops in the diversion programs that are discussed on pages 10 and 11 of the LFC report, why would anybody who's rational enter a diversion program when they've got a 70% chance of being released and an even much smaller percentage chance of actually being ever convicted of anything? Those trade-offs that you need to have a successful diversion program are gone. So, I know the DA has raised issues with the data. That's not really what we're here to talk about. Let's assume all the statistics are right in the report. Violent crime is being committed by 5% of the people who are released pre-trial. And a question we have to ask ourselves as a community is 5% an acceptable failure rate for the criminal justice system? This is a matter of life and death. And, you know, would you jump out of a plane if you knew that your parachute was going to fail 5% of the time? That's really the analysis that we have to ask ourselves at this moment. And that is only looking at 5% being rearrested, not reoffending, but rearrested. So offending and getting caught. So, you know, we always want to hear from the great minds of the LFC, but here we just think that this is a very narrow sliver of what necessarily needs to be a much broader conversation. And we welcome the chief's thoughts on this as well.
You know, for months I've talked about accountability to the whole system. And without a doubt, the Albuquerque Police Department, we have to work harder. We have to work smarter. We've brought in $80 million worth of technology to help us become more effective. We've seen where we have faults and how we could become better. But the one thing I will say that stuck out in my mind was, you know, 5% rate of violent crime is related to these individuals, known violent crime. I think that's the key because we haven't solved a lot of violent crime. The one thing I challenge them is anybody who would like to accompany me to go speak to the mothers and the fathers and the brothers and the sisters of this 5%, I welcome you. Anybody that would like to just reach out and you could go ahead and make those phone calls with me. I had a difficult phone call earlier this week and I spoke to one of the mothers of a young man who had come to the University of New Mexico to fulfill his dream about education and got murdered on our streets. And the mom told me it was the first time in 65 days that she had had a good night's sleep. And we had a great conversation and she's supporting us getting tough on crime because she doesn't want other families to go through what she did for her son. So yes, 5% may mean nothing as a number to some people, but that 5% to some people mean everything and it will change their life forever.
Thank you, Chief and CIO Nair. We've got Chris McKee with KRQE next in the queue, I believe. Chris, are you on? Thanks, Chris. Go ahead and ask your question.
All right, thank you very much. I had a broad question to just kind of capture a sense of, I guess, the feeling going into the start of this session here. The chief certainly was alluding to this moment right now with the respects of what crime is doing to the community being sort of a tipping point. I'm paraphrasing here, but do you feel there is momentum to pass all of these legislative priorities this year? I mean, I'm looking at this list that you guys shared in the main first part of the news conference, and there are at least 9 items, if I counted correctly here, for legislative action on here. With a 30-day session and the bills that are being discussed only at the call of the governor and her executive messages, I wanted to see if A, if you think there's momentum, B, if you think there's enough time to get these passed, and do you think that all of these items will be tackled in this session? If not, maybe what are some of the top ones you really want to see addressed?
Mayor Keller?
Well, let me first acknowledge that there absolutely is momentum. There is more momentum for this session than I've ever seen for crime in my time in public service. And, you know, as a reminder, I spent 6 years in the Senate. And we have never seen a situation where 3 things are coming together. Number one, crime is the highest it has been. Number 2, there's willingness on behalf of the governor's office and legislators from both parties to address this issue. They've all been in general clear about that. And number 3 is funding is not an issue, at least mathematically. And this is what is a major game changer. I mean, we have a multi-billion-dollar surplus, and we can and should use that money to fight crime, whether it's in the court system, whether it's in the parole system, or whether it's in law enforcement directly. This is the first year you cannot use money as an excuse. That is what is very different. Now, I do want to speak to the time issue, the structural issue, a 30-day session with, you know, specific rules about what can happen and what can't. Here's the message from Albuquerque. This has to be fixed. So if you can't get it done in 30 days, there should be a special session. I've been calling for a special session on crime for 9 months. And if we can't get it done now, that's okay. That's why our state constitution has a process to deal with urgent issues. And it would be a special session and it should be on crime. That's what we should do if these measures don't pass.
I know there has been some discussion that there's maybe some resistance for a few of these crime-related matters. Specifically, I'm thinking of the rebuttable presumption statute. Do you have a feeling, though, that perhaps those things can be worked out? Yeah, I know that seemingly there is a lot of momentum, but a lot of times it feels like in the legislature it takes one sort of person in the right position to show a little bit of opposition for that bill to not make it out of committee or for things to get derailed. So with that opposition in mind, I guess the question being, do you think that that is something that can be worked through, or will that be a significant challenge here?
Well, there's always a challenge when you're trying to pass things in the legislature. And, again, back when I was a senator, we each have filibuster powers. So, you can block anything you want at the end of the day. And that leads me to, I think, just what our hope is. Our hope is that we at least get a full vote in whatever committee or floor on all of these issues. And if they don't pass, they don't pass. That's why we have a legislature. What we don't want is procedure to be used as an excuse, or for time to be used as an excuse. If you don't like something, just vote against it. That's fine. That's how it should work. And so that's our only ask, is that we just allow the votes to be taken in a timely manner.
Thanks. A release with these legislative items and investments went out a few days ago. We'll make sure that participants on this call have a copy of that again. I believe Jessica Dyer from the Albuquerque Journal, I believe you're next.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, so I know you guys are talking big picture, lots of pieces of legislation that all work together, but on the rebuttable presumption bill, that you are talking about keeping more people behind bars. And given the understaffing at the county jail, and a lot of other issues going on there, are you at all concerned about keeping more people without convictions behind bars? There's a case backlog in the courts. Is there any legislation that addresses the jail in any way that is going to maybe improve conditions there, that works in concert with all these other matters?
Chief, would you like to speak to that?
I'm not aware of any legislation that addresses the jail right now, but we have been advocates this whole time for all parts of the criminal justice system. And I think that we need to really look at this, like we have to stop making excuses. Oh, the jail might get too full. Oh, the courts are going to get behind. Oh, the DA's office ain't going to be able to prosecute all these cases. We have 40 key points in this Metro Crime Initiative, and a lot of these issues are addressed in there. We have areas where we're addressing retention of officers, and it could carry over to corrections, it could carry over to any other part. But too many times individuals get stuck on one aspect, one portion, and we start predicting the future and making excuses for the prediction of the future. And I hope that our legislatures look at that and they realize that. The public sees through that. Their excuses, their reasons of finding ways not to do stuff. This administration is about getting things done. How are we going to get this done? And we'll continue to work to get this done. And if the jail gets overstaffed at some point or overfilled, then we need to meet with Metro Court to look at low-level offenders that we could streamline processes and diversions. When we get there, we'll do that. We have a great relationship, and they've actually brought ideas to the table if something like this were to occur that we could implement. So I hope that we don't continue down this path of these are the excuses of why we can't do it, and let's start looking at how we can get this done.
I do have another question if I can ask it. The mobile speed enforcement, how much are you asking for? When is that going to be in place? And I thought the program was supposed to pay for itself.
We'll have to provide the number to you just after this presser, but Sarita, would you like to speak to it? Thanks.
Jessica. Yeah, we'll get you the number of the exact legislative ask. This will roll out as we've been talking about this spring. There will be a month of warnings before tickets start to go out. The program does generate revenue, should pay for itself, but it is a sort of technology-based program, and there's some infrastructure that has to be built to and I'm not the tech person, so I'm not going to say words like 5G that I don't really understand, but there are some things that we need to get in place in our city to create the nodes that are able to service these facilities or this equipment, and that's what we're asking for the capital for.
Thanks. And so we're already over time, so we're gonna wrap there, but I'd like to ask Mayor Keller to share a few words at the close here. Thanks.
I would just add, I think, two broad points when we think about this session and what's at stake. You know, number one is we agree on some truths. We agree that we absolutely have to do something about the rise in violent crime in New Mexico. We also agree that our criminal justice system is not working. And so all we are asking is for action to be taken in those two areas. And there is room for other ideas. We're totally open to that. But what we cannot have is just, well, there's a tiny reason why we should wait on something. That has been holding us back for a decade. That is part of the problem. It's always easier to say no for some small ticky-tack reason than it is to actually move forward. And that's what we need this session. People have to honor the commitment to fix a criminal justice system. They have to honor the commitment to do something against crime, not honor the commitment to find a way not to do something. And I know even when I was there, we did that every single year when I was there. We found ways not to help fight crime. And so that's what's got to change this session. And I think the last thing that I would just add is that when we think about all the things that we have to do, we want to acknowledge we all have roles to play. I need city council's help on certain things. We've had APD do a lot of different things. We've changed how we work with the DA. We're trying to work with the courts on things that they need, especially funding. And so it's a responsibility we all have to bear, but the responsibility is to actually come up with an answer, not just find a way to say no. That's the easy way out. And that's what we're not going to tolerate. That's where we need accountable this year, is to find answers, not take the easy way out and explain why we shouldn't do something. So I think lastly, the general notion too of this reform process that we've been through in 10 years, as Sarita outlined, really 12 years. Whether it's gaps in behavioral health system or it is bail reform and so forth. We're just saying the system should be tweaked a little bit. We're just saying that it's not working. And that's all we're asking. It's not a huge change to tweak a tiny rebuttable presumption for violent individuals who use a firearm, right? We still believe in the broader concept and want to stick with it. And so I think that's also important too. We're talking about taking a pendulum that has swung too far and just moving it a little bit that way. And so that's our approach. That's what the Metro Crime Initiative is all about. And that's what we hope this legislature will be able to help with. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, CAO and APD Chief Policy Advisor Damon Martinez. And thanks everybody for joining us today. Please feel free to continue to be in touch with Ava and I throughout the session about your questions as these bills and investments move forward. Thanks again.